Hello, long time no see. Let's take this opportunity to talk about each other, in particular other people, the phenomena of other minds. They are like a closed box. You can see its shape, its color, you can feel its weight, but you cannot see what's inside. By analogy, we can see the behavior of other people, the structure of the brain, the physiology of the body, the expressions of the face, but we can never see their mind. We cannot perceive what's in there. Or can we? We do talk about other minds all the time. We see that person as being sad, or we say that that person is having a good time, or he gave me a weird look. What do we mean by all of that? What are we saying when we say such things? Theory suggests that when I look at another person, I make a sort of theory about the person's inner mental states. I look at the person and I'm like, wow, that person is smiling, and I know smile to be connected with happiness, therefore I deduce that that person is happy. Simulation theory proposes that I make inferences about another person's mind in virtue of putting myself into that person's shoes. I see someone crying and I'm like, wait a minute, when I cried I didn't have a good time, therefore that person is not having a good time. Historically, these two theories had been seen as exhausting the alternatives, like it either is theory or simulation theory that have to account for how we access other minds. But recently, a development in philosophy of mind proposed another theory called perception theory, that we actually see other minds. It basically suggests that there's no extra sensory cognitive operation at play when I see another person and know that that person is sad. I just kind of get that feeling immediately. This view has been anticipated by two very important figures in 20th century philosophy, one of them being this channel's favorite, Ludwig Wittgenstein. To quote him, "Consciousness is in the face of another. Look into someone else's face and see the consciousness in it, and also a particular shade of consciousness. You see in it, joy, indifference, interest, excitement, dullness, etc. Delight in the face of another. Do you look within yourself in order to recognize the fury on his face? It is there, as clearly as in your own breast." But what does it mean to see anger in another person's face? Is it the same as seeing a chair or a table? Maybe we have to be aware of some vague language at play here. And to make that apparent, Ludwig Wittgenstein talked of the duck-rabbit illusion. When we look at this picture, we can say that we see a rabbit, or we can say that we see a duck, or we could say that first we saw a duck, but now we see a rabbit. But what do we mean that we first saw one thing and then we saw another? Actually, we saw just one thing, this picture. What changed wasn't what was physically seen, rather our interpretation of the picture is what changed. Therefore, we can spot a special usage of the word see, to see a resemblance, to interpret. And that's what Wittgenstein means when he says that we see anger in someone's face. We don't see it in the way we see a chair. The word see is meant metaphorically. The mind is not just given. And in that way, Wittgenstein already answers a misconception that came to be known as the myth of the given mind. To perceive a mind does not mean it's like a widely open box that we can just peer inside of. If that would be the case, then misunderstandings would never occur. Linguistic confusion wouldn't be a thing. We wouldn't even need language, because we would all have telepathic superpowers. We could just, peer into each other's mind. But of course, other minds are not like open boxes. They are like closed ones, Wittgenstein says. But even though they are closed, he says, we can still perceive what's inside. To understand this point, we can imagine a special breed of aliens that can turn invisible, but at the cost of creating a powerful magnetic field. When they would be invisible, we could still visually detect them via the objects that would stick to them or go into their direction. We would see them, but in the second sense of the word, we could understand that they are there, even though we wouldn't directly see them. We would still perceive them. By analogy, it could be the case that mental states aren't strictly speaking perceptible, but we still have something of a acquired perception of their presence. We perceive them in the way we perceive invisible aliens. Perhaps over time one acquires enough familiarity with the outward behavior that, let's say, anger gives rise to, so that we don't need to theorize about its presence or simulate it, we just perceive it to be there. Earlier we said that there's two thinkers that anticipated this view in the 20th century, and the second one being Maurice Jean-Jacques Merleau-Ponty, the French phenomenologist, who said that yes, we don't see mental states in the way we see a chair, the mind is not given, and yet we can perceive the mind. Imagine that I am in the presence of someone who, for one reason or another, is extremely annoyed with me. My interlocutor gets angry and I notice that he is expressing his anger by speaking aggressively, by gesticulating and shouting. But where is this anger? People will say that it is in the mind of my interlocutor, and what that means is not entirely clear, for I could not imagine the malice and cruelty which I discern in my opponent's looks separated from his gestures, speech and body. None of this takes place in some otherworldly realm, in some shrine located beyond the body of the angry man. It is really here, in this room, and in this part of the room that the anger breaks forth. It is in the space between him and me that it unfolds. Elsewhere he writes, and yet the sense of the gesture is not perceived, like, for example, the color of the rug. If it were presented to me as a thing, then it would be not clear why my understanding of gestures should be restricted, for the most part, to human gestures. I do not even understand emotions in primitive people, or in milieus too different from my own. The sense of the gestures is not given, but rather understood. Just like we can perceive the aliens by understanding their magnetic properties, we can perceive emotion by understanding the gestures of people. It's like a smartphone would be dropped into a tribe's land that would never be in contact with the other world. Well, the people there would perceive the complex object in front of them, but they wouldn't perceive it as a smartphone. So this example goes to show that we cannot confuse blindness with ignorance. In the same sense, mental states can be perceived and yet misunderstood. So Wittgenstein here makes some identical points to Merleau-Ponty. He too observes that our ability to understand another's expressions of emotions depends on a number of things, such as belonging to the same culture or knowing the person well. He says, for example, that Chinese gestures may be as difficult for Europeans to understand as Chinese sentences. Elsewhere he writes, I wouldn't know, for instance, what genuine gladness looks like with Chinese. Wittgenstein says that we should imagine other minds as a kind of Morse code. Once you will know the code, you will be able to understand the meaning of expressions of emotions and so on. But until you will learn the code, the meaning of it will be completely inaccessible to you, even though in a sense everything is just out there, all the facts about what the expressions mean. So how would Wittgenstein and Merleau-Ponty answer the question of how we access other minds? Like, how do we look at a person and say, I see sadness on his face? Well, they would say, all the facts about those mental states are already out there, in the body, our expressions, our face, gestures, behavior, tone of voice. But to make sense of those facts, what we need is understanding. So one thing that I didn't mention today is the so-called problem of other minds, that says that, well, if other minds aren't accessible to me, then how do I ever know that other minds exist? And since I can't know that every other mind exists, or any other mind exists for that matter. I could just be alone in the universe, which is a skeptical solution to this problem called solipsism. I can only know myself to exist, but not other minds. I could be alone. This view rests on the presupposition that mind and body are two different things that kind of interact, but the mind is immaterial, and I can, with my eyes, only perceive material things such as the body of another person, but I cannot perceive the immaterial thing, the mind of another person, which is located in some shrine beyond the body. I cannot access that. And Merleau-Ponty and Wittgenstein did strongly disagree with this view. They said that our mind is just our body. We are our body. We are not something that is somewhere in some platonic world of ideas. We are literally here. And what happens in our mind will be expressed in our body as a consequence. And if you want to study a mind of another person, all you need to do is study their body. Because that other person is the body that they live in. Well, and that's a very neat solution to the problem of other minds, I would say. If you made it so far into the video, well, let's discuss. I am always looking forward to the discussions in the comments, so let me know what you think about what you've just seen today. What we talked about today is very closely related to the private language idea. It says that our words denote things in our minds which are inaccessible to others, private. So the meanings of words are private. So how can we ever understand other people? So check that out if you're interested in more about this topic. And another related video to this is aphantasia, a condition where people cannot visualize things, and they usually don't realize it for a very long period of their life, because they just suppose that when other people say about seeing images in their head, they are talking in metaphors. So if you're interested in anything like that, feel free to check out my other videos. They should be displayed here in front of my face right now. So yeah, see you.